The letter was printed on that god-awful cream-colored HOA paper, thick, pretentious, and always bad news. I almost didn't open it. Figured it was another warning about my grass being an inch too long or a reminder to repaint my mailbox to match approved palette number 4. But this one wasn't about grass height or mailbox paint. This one was about Wilbur, my pet pig. Wilbur wasn't just a pig. He was my best friend, my emotional support animal, and quite possibly the only soul who didn't judge me after my life fell apart 3 years ago. He wore bow ties on holidays, knew how to sit on command, and oinked every time I sneezed. And, for the record, he was cleaner than most of the HOA board members I'd seen at community barbecues. The letter was short and smug. Per HOA Covenant 6.3b, livestock and farm animals are prohibited within the community. You have 14 days to remove the pig from the premises or face escalating fines and enforcement. Livestock. Like he was some muddy barn creature rooting through trash instead of napping in a heated bed next to mine. I sat on the porch, Wilbur, curled against my side, his breath soft and warm under my hand. I read the letter again, then looked out across the street at Karen Gladstone's house. White shutters, wind chimes, perfectly manicured evil. They thought they could take him from me. They had no idea who they were messing with. Before everything turned into a courtroom circus and neighborhood warfare, life here was simple, quiet, predictable in the way a cup of tea is warm. I moved to Maplewood Grove 3 years ago, thinking I'd found my safe haven. Clean sidewalks, polite waves from neighbors, weekend yard sales, nothing flashy, nothing messy. Exactly what I needed after the storm my life had just been through. I'd lost my husband, Jonah, to a brain aneurysm that hit like a sniper in the night. One moment we were bickering about whether to watch Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune. The next, he was gone. The house we'd shared in the city felt haunted. I needed a reset, somewhere smaller, quieter, somewhere that didn't echo. Enter Wilbur. He was never supposed to be a pig. I went to the shelter for a cat. Instead, I left with a 20-pound potbelly pig who nuzzled my leg like he'd known me in a past life. I don't know if I rescued him or he rescued me. Maybe both. Wilbur is no ordinary pig. He's an emotional support animal, certified and everything. He's house-trained, walks on a leash, and wears little bow ties that match the season. At Halloween, he was Dracula. At Christmas, he was an elf. He makes kids laugh, turns grumpy mailmen into softies, and even won over the UPS driver who used to be terrified of animals. People stopped on the sidewalk just to take photos with him. Well, most people. Karen Gladstone, HOA president and self-declared neighborhood monarch, always walked past us like we were contagious. She wore beige like it was a personality, and had a haircut that said, "I want to speak to your manager." And she usually was the manager. She smiled with her teeth, not her eyes, and once called Wilbur unsanitary at a block party while I was standing right there. Still, I kept the peace. I followed the rules. I paid the HOA fees on time, even when they raised them with no warning. I trimmed my hedges to the approved 36 inches. I even stopped planting sunflowers after she claimed they were too aggressive looking. I played along, until they came after Wilbur. The envelope was tucked halfway into my mailbox like it didn't even want to be there. Cream-colored paper, HOA letterhead, bold black font. I unfolded it on the porch with Wilbur nestled beside me, his snout twitching. Lazily in the breeze, the words hit like a slap. Pursuant to Covenant 6.3b, the presence of livestock within the neighborhood is a violation of HOA guidelines. You are hereby given 14 days to remove the animal, or face escalating fines and potential legal enforcement. I read it again. Then a third time. Livestock? I stormed into the house, Wilbur's tiny hooves tapping behind me on the hardwood. I grabbed the file I kept in the kitchen drawer. Wilbur's vaccination records, ESA registration, veterinarian notes, even a letter from my therapist. Everything legal, everything in order. I sent an email to the HOA immediately, attaching all the documents. I wrote it calmly, respectfully. Wilbur is a registered emotional support animal. He's house-trained, poses no danger or nuisance, and has lived here peacefully for over 2 years. This notice appears to be a misunderstanding. 2 hours later, I got a reply. Not from some nameless board assistant, from Karen herself. The presence of a pig, regardless of paperwork, is a clear violation. Emotional support designation does not override HOA standards. This is not a farm. A few minutes after that, a new notice was taped to my front door. Daily fines, $100, possible property line, legal action pending. It was escalating fast. I went to Karen's house the next morning, knocked. She opened the door just enough for me to see her eyes and that tight-lipped smile. "Karen," I said, clutching the folder, "this is absurd. Wilbur's an emotional support animal. This isn't just some pet. I need him. And legally, you can't just—" "This neighborhood has standards," she cut in. "If you want to live like it's a barnyard, I suggest you move somewhere, more rural." She shut the door before I could speak again. That night, I sat on the couch with Wilbur snoring softly beside me. I felt like I was being kicked out of my own home. Anger bubbled up beneath the fear. This wasn't just about rules. This was about control, power. Karen never liked that I didn't cower, didn't conform perfectly to her beige-painted kingdom. Now she had found her excuse to get rid of me, or worse, to make an example out of me. But I wasn't about to let her take Wilbur away. I don't care how many meetings she chaired or how many bylaws she twisted. She'd started a war. And I wasn't backing down. The next week was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. It started with a warning about my grass. Apparently, it was 1.75 inches above the maximum allowable height. I measured it myself. It wasn't. But the citation came anyway, along with a $50 fine and a smug little note reminding me of Maplewood's aesthetic standards. The day after that, a noise complaint. Animal disturbance, it read. Prolonged. Grunting. Wilbur, bless him, had only let out a few sleepy oinks while sunbathing in the yard. I should know. I was right there reading a book. Then came the drone. I spotted it hovering just above my fence line while I was folding laundry. At first I thought it belonged to a kid, but then I noticed it circled my yard, paused, then zipped, back toward Karen's house like a loyal pet. I stared at it the whole way. The message was loud and clear. We're watching you. By the end of the week, I had 5 new citations and over $400 in accumulated fines. I watched my neighbors carefully. The Harrisons, who used to invite Wilbur over for their kid's birthday parties, suddenly stopped making eye contact. Mrs. Patel, who once crocheted Wilbur a tiny holiday sweater, crossed the street to avoid walking past my house. I knew Karen's fingerprints were all over this, whispering behind fences, stoking fear, convincing them I was bringing down their precious property values with my farm animal. And then I remembered. 2 years ago, Karen had organized a neighborhood renaissance initiative, basically a thinly veiled gentrification scheme dressed up with a PowerPoint and cheese cubes. She wanted all homes repainted in neutral tones, old fences torn down, new hedges planted at exact intervals. I sat through the entire meeting in stunned silence, then stood up and told her, I didn't move here to live inside a real estate brochure. She hadn't looked at me the same since. Now it all made sense. She was cleaning house, prepping the neighborhood for her next big project. And Wilbur, he didn't fit the brochure. Neither did I. This wasn't about pigs. This was about control, optics, property value. I stood at the end of my driveway that night, holding another citation, staring across the cul-de-sac at her pristine front yard. A new for sale sign had popped up 2 houses down, one she was likely overseeing, and I realized something chilling. She was getting ready to flip the whole block. Wilbur bumped his head into my leg, asking for a snack. I gave him a strawberry, but I couldn't taste the victory in it. Not yet. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a setup, and I wasn't going to let her roll over me with her clipboard and fake smiles. She wanted war. She just got it. I don't consider myself a particularly litigious person. But when the system starts coming for the one thing that keeps you grounded, you learn fast. I spent the next 3 nights glued to my laptop, neck sore, eyes burning, Wilbur curled up beside me like a living stress ball. I read everything, from Maplewood Grove's HOA bylaws to obscure county zoning codes, and eventually, federal housing law. That's when I stumbled into the rabbit hole that changed everything. The Fair Housing Act. It had a clause, buried beneath legalese and citations, that protected the rights of individuals with disabilities or emotional needs to keep emotional support animals, regardless of local or HOA pet restrictions. As long as the animal was documented and didn't pose a threat, they were legally protected. I read it again and again. My hand actually trembled when I clicked save. Wilbur wasn't just a pig. He was a shield, a federally protected one. Still, I needed backup. I called Jen, a friend from college who'd gone on to become a civil attorney. We hadn't talked in a while, but after one look at the HOA's letters and my ESA documents, she gave a low whistle. "This is textbook discrimination," she said. "They're banking on you folding before you realize how illegal this is. Idiots." She promised to help me draft a formal cease and desist letter and prep a case if it came to that. That night, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat, on the kitchen floor, legs folded beneath me, Wilbur lying across my lap like a hot, snoring loaf of bread. The room was quiet, except for his slow, content grunts. I pressed my face into his fur, let the tears come, thick, salty, and furious. "I'm not letting them take you," I whispered. "I don't care if I have to sue the entire damn neighborhood. I'm not losing another thing I love." He lifted his head and blinked at me, then nudged a leftover piece of apple into my hand, like some kind of reverse comfort offering. That made me laugh through the tears, which made me cry harder. This wasn't just about Wilbur anymore. This was about every inch of dignity I'd rebuilt after my world fell apart. It was about the right to heal the way I needed to. And I'd be damned if I let Karen Gladstone and her beige tyranny rip that away. It happened on a Tuesday. I was halfway through a meeting at work when my phone lit up with a message from Ms. Fernandez, my sweet, quiet neighbor across the street. "Animal control is here. They're in your yard. They have a truck. Karen is watching." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might faint. I didn't even tell my boss I was leaving. I just grabbed my keys and bolted out of the building like the place was on fire. I broke about 4 traffic laws on the way home. By the time I turned onto my street, I could see the white municipal truck parked at the curb, 2 officers in khaki uniforms walking toward my front gate. Wilbur's gate. He was in the backyard, totally unaware that people were preparing to take him away. My best friend, my ESA, my only real family. I screeched to a stop, flung the car door open, and sprinted across the lawn. "Stop!" I yelled, breath heaving. "He's an emotional support animal. You can't take him." The officers froze. One of them raised his hands in a kind of "don't shoot, we're just doing our jobs" gesture. "Ma'am, we were told the HOA had authority to remove an unauthorized livestock animal. We're just following protocol." Then I heard it. That voice. Her voice. Karen. She was standing on her porch in full Stepford mode, beige cardigan, clipboard, in hand, mouth twisted in righteous rage. "Pigs don't belong in my neighborhood," she shouted across the lawn. "You're violating community standards." I had my phone out before she even finished the sentence. I hit record. Her voice, carried beautifully on the mic. You could practically hear the entitlement echoing. The officers exchanged a look. One leaned in and asked quietly, "Do you have paperwork?" I opened my purse and handed him the folder I now carried everywhere. He flipped through Wilbur's ESA certification, the vet letters, my therapist's documentation. He nodded, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, this animal is federally protected under the Fair Housing Act. You don't have the authority to order his removal." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. But she's not disabled," she sputtered. "She's just dramatic." I took a deep breath and stepped between them, Wilbur now trotting up to my side like a little snorting knight. "That's enough," I said. You've harassed me, lied to my neighbors, and now you're trying to steal my animal under false pretenses. Karen opened her mouth, but I raised a finger. Don't speak. I looked at the officers. We're done here. Thank you for your time. They nodded and left. Karen stood frozen on her porch, seething in silence. I turned to Wilbur, scratching his chin gently. That's it, buddy, I whispered. We're going scorched earth. The next morning, Jen and I filed the paperwork. The day we filed the lawsuit, I felt like I was stepping onto a battlefield with a pig and a binder full of evidence as my sword and shield. Jen and I sat at her office, papers spread out across the polished wood table. The air smelled like stale coffee and righteous fury. Our claim? Violation of the Fair Housing Act, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and harassment. A trifecta of HOA. Misconduct we named Karen personally. Her fingerprints were all over this war, and Jen wasn't about to let her hide behind board titles and committee jargon. Once the paperwork was filed, the wheels of justice started turning, and oh boy, did discovery deliver. Karen's emails were a goldmine of nastiness. The board's internal group chat, thank you subpoena, was filled with mocking language. She had referred to Wilbur as a filthy pork chop in a bow tie, and worse, she'd called my mental health an excuse for attention in one email to the HOA's vice president. That alone sent Jen's eyebrows to the ceiling. Then came the one that sealed the narrative. We need to make an example out of her. If we let one widow drag her trauma around like a petting zoo, what's next? Goats in every driveway? Yeah, that one made it into our complaint front and center, and that's when the tide started to shift. Neighbors who had gone cold suddenly began leaving notes in my mailbox. Quiet, apologetic ones. I'm sorry, we didn't know. One couple, the Densons, even knocked on my door with homemade muffins and tears in their eyes. We were told you were making it all up, they whispered. Karen said Wilbur bit a kid. We're so sorry. I hadn't realized how far Karen's smear campaign had gone. She'd built an entire narrative around me being unstable, unfit, and dangerous. And now, with the truth laid bare, it was crumbling fast. Karen, for her part, didn't retreat. She doubled down. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood warning residents that outsiders were trying to destroy Maplewood's values. She accused me of weaponizing the legal system for personal gain. She even tried to start a GoFundMe for her legal defense against community sabotage. It raised $38, mostly from her cousin, but what rattled her wasn't the lawsuit. It was the silence. Her loyal lieutenants, Pam, George, and that awful gossiping woman from Lot 14, stopped returning her calls. She was shouting into a vacuum, and no one was answering. I watched it happen slowly, like a queen on a crumbling chessboard, still barking orders even as the pawns abandoned her. And I just kept walking Wilbur, same bow tie as always, smiling at every pair of eyes that dared to meet mine again. The real trial hadn't even started, but the court of public opinion, it was already turning. The courtroom smelled like lemon cleaner and stale coffee, an odd mix of sterile and suffocating. My palms were slick, but Wilbur's photo in my pocket kept me steady. Not that he was allowed inside, of course, but his spirit sat beside me. Bow tie and all, Karen strutted in wearing a blazer that looked like it had been ironed with vengeance. Beside her was her lawyer, a tall, smirking man named Mitchell Cray. He looked like he'd never met a homeowner he couldn't outmaneuver and thought this would be just another Tuesday. Poor guy. Judge Langston, a stern but fair woman with reading, glasses low on her nose, took the bench. Let's begin. Mitchell launched into a sanctimonious opening. He painted the HOA as the noble defender of community standards, claiming I was abusing ESA status to keep an unsanitary farm animal in a residential area. He used words like nuisance, hazard, and precedent. He even pulled out a blown-up photo of Wilbur rolling in a mud puddle like it was Exhibit A in a war crimes trial. Jen waited calmly. Then it was our turn. She stood, the calm, her voice sharp enough to slice steel. Your Honor, this is not about a pig. This is about a person's right to healing, and a community's failure to show basic human decency. Then she laid it all out. First came Wilbur's documentation, his official ESA certification, letters from 2 therapists, vet records showing he was neutered, vaccinated, and fully house-trained. Then the neighbors. One by one they took the stand or submitted written testimony. Ms. Fernandez, the Densons, even little Lily Thompson, who wore a pink dress and gripped a drawing of her and Wilbur under a rainbow. He helped me feel safe when my mom was sick, Lily whispered into the mic. He gives good snuggles. Mitchell objected to the testimony of a 6-year-old. The judge overruled him with a look that could curdle milk. Next came the emails. Jen projected them on a screen like firecrackers. We need to make an example of her. That widow thinks grief is a license to hoard barn animals. Once we get rid of the pork chop, the house prices will bounce back. Then came the video. There was Karen screeching, "Pigs don't belong in my neighborhood," as animal. Control officers looked on awkwardly. Her voice echoed through the courtroom. Several people shifted in their seats. One juror actually winced. And then I took the stand. I told them about my husband, about the cancer, the slow, cruel way it stole him from me. How the house had become a mausoleum of memories I couldn't bear to walk through alone. How the silence used to crush me. And then Wilbur. How he rooted me out of bed. Made me laugh again, gave me a reason to open the curtains and greet the world. I described his little grunts when he wanted a hug, the way he wore a bow tie every time we visited the neighborhood kids. I looked right at the judge and said, "He saved my life. That pig gave me back the pieces I didn't think I'd ever find again." The courtroom was silent when I stepped down. Even Mitchell didn't object, and then it was Karen's turn. She was already red-faced by the time she took the stand. Jen barely had to push. "Is it true you referred to the plaintiff's animal as a filthy pork chop?" Karen scoffed. "I have freedom of speech. Is it also true you called her a trauma hoarder in your emails? She is, look at her. Playing the widow card to parade a pig around like it's a damn therapy dog." The courtroom tensed. Jen stayed calm. "Do you believe your behavior was appropriate for someone in a leadership position?" Karen laughed, then cracked. "You people don't get it. This isn't about her trauma. This is about order, property value. First it's pigs, then goats, then God knows what. She's ruining everything I built." "Everything you built?" the judge asked. Karen snapped around. "Yes, and if you can't see that, then maybe you're just another woke pig lover like the rest of them." You could have heard a pin drop. Mitchell buried his face in his hands. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Thank you, Mrs. Gladstone. I believe we've heard enough." Judge Langston returned to the courtroom the following week, glasses perched low, face unreadable. My hands gripped the bench in front of me as she cleared her throat and began. "In the matter of discrimination and violation of the Fair Housing Act, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff." I exhaled so hard I nearly collapsed. She continued, voice like a gavel itself. "The HOA will immediately cease all enforcement actions regarding the plaintiff's emotional support animal. Additionally, the HOA is ordered to pay $25,000 in damages for emotional distress and issue a formal public apology to be posted on the community bulletin and website for no less than 90 days. Karen let out a strangled gasp behind me. But the real cherry came last. This court also recommends a community vote to determine continued leadership of the HOA, given the misconduct demonstrated in evidence. That vote came 2 days later. Karen was removed in a landslide. Even her allies turned. George from Lot 7 muttered something about never trusting someone who hates bow ties, and that was that. A week later, the new HOA president, Ms. Fernandez, bless her, hand-delivered me a certificate. It was laminated, signed by half the neighborhood, and adorned with cartoon pigs. Wilbur, honorary resident of Maplewood Grove. I taped it right above his food bowl. He sniffed it once, then flopped, over for a belly rub. Damn right, I thought. We earned this. The air was thick with the smell of barbecue, and the neighborhood was finally alive again. I stood by the grill, flipping burgers and listening to the chatter around me. Children squealed with delight as they pet Wilbur, who wore his finest tuxedo bow tie, a white satin number that made him look like the most distinguished pig on the block. The same kids who once avoided him were now trying to coax him into a game of fetch, with varying degrees of success. Wilbur's a celebrity now, Mrs. Denson laughed, a plate of macaroni salad in her hands. I smiled. He's always been one. Just took you all a while to see it. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months or even years approached with awkward smiles. Some of them, the ones who had been the most vocal in supporting Karen, sidled up to me with their heads down. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, Greg." From next door muttered, offering me a plate of coleslaw. We didn't know the full story. Karen, well, she's good at twisting things. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. I know, but you should have listened to your gut. You knew. She was wrong and you chose to ignore it, Greg winced. I'll do better. One by one they came, apologies, awkward but sincere. Even George from Lot 14, who used to gossip at the mailboxes about me being a troublemaker, came to stand at my side. I didn't realize how bad it was, he said, looking over at Wilbur, who was snuggled on the grass with a giggling child in his lap. I never thought about it like that, about you, needing him. You all should have, I replied, my gaze hardening for a moment. But better late than never. Of course, not everyone was welcome back into my circle. Karen was conspicuously absent from the BBQ. Rumor had it she'd had to sell her house at a significant loss after the vote. The community had made it clear she was no longer welcome. That smug persona of hers had cracked under the weight of her own arrogance. She'd moved away within the month, her departure more dramatic than a Broadway exit, leaving behind a trail of whispers and raised eyebrows. Her name was still the subject of hushed conversations at the mailboxes, but her grip on the neighborhood was finally, gloriously broken. Even the new HOA president, Ms. Fernandez, stopped by with a freshly baked pie to apologize for not standing up sooner. It was a humble pie indeed. As the sun set and the last of the guests filtered out with full bellies, I stood on my porch, watching Wilbur happily trotting around the yard. He was officially a legend, the true king of the block. On a whim, I dug around in the garage for a little wood and paint I had left over from a project last year. I nailed up a simple sign just beneath the porch light. This house is protected by one happy pig and the United States Constitution. It wasn't fancy, but it felt right. The simple truth was written in bold letters. No one would forget Wilbur's contribution to this neighborhood's redemption, least of all, me. Later, that night, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars blink into existence above, I couldn't help but smile. The quiet hum of the evening wrapped around me, and for the first time in a long while I felt peaceful, at ease. This place was mine again, our place. Wilbur at my feet, a neighborhood finally healed and the weight of injustice lifted. Karen had tried to destroy me, to take my joy, my peace, and my pig, and in the end, she had lost. Turns out revenge is best served slow-roasted, and with a side of justice.